Hi everyone, and welcome to my list of my favourite horror film soundtracks of all time. So here we are with a Halloween related list, like I said I would do, and I thought there's no point just doing another review of a horror film, let's do a list. And yeah, I didn't want to do my favourite horror films of all time because I thought that would probably reveal, some stuff that I didn't want to reveal yet about certain directors and stuff, when talking about them, the actual films. This, I'll be mentioning, how it kind of relates to the film times, but this is mainly, the actual the soundtracks of horror films, if I listen to them, how much I love them. Of course, this includes scores and, songs that are in, horror films. And of course it can be both, which a lot of the case it is, a lot of the time it is the case, and some of these very well, they are. Now, I'll give some honourable mentions first, but then I'm going to be doing my top 10, horror film soundtracks of all time. So some honourable mentions, the ones that didn't quite make the cut, and these could well appear, in a video at some point where I do, my top 100 horrors, or maybe top 50, and probably have an order in then, but these are some other ones, just a few. Gremlins, I think, the soundtrack to that is great, mainly the songs that he used, but yeah, I think that's a great soundtrack, great fun, and just really, again, very atmospheric at times. Another one would be Poltergeist. Now I've watched this, rewatched it yesterday, and wow, I absolutely loved it, and the soundtrack's really, really wonderful. Jerry Goldsmith, who's a great composer. That was amazing. You've got 28 Days Later, quite a recent one. You could also say It's, the 2017 one. Great soundtrack there. Very, very beautiful stuff. And there's loads. One that actually nearly made my top 10 is Nosferatu. The original. I think that's a wonderful score. But yes, we'll start off with number 10, and of course, now this is, of course, most people wouldn't consider this a horror film, or, I don't know, it's more, to me it is more of a thriller, but it is a horror as well, and that is The Sixth Sense. James Newton Howard composed this score. Of course, he would, work with a lot of, with Shyamalan on a lot of his scores, and is this his greatest score? No, it's not, actually, and it's not the greatest that he's worked with Shyamalan on, I think. But, putting that aside, it's absolutely stunning. I think it's more, very, very atmospheric, of course, and just the way it, builds the tension in different scenes. But it is, again, very, very, James Newton Howard makes some really just wonderful, beautiful scores, ones that really, very, very emotional, and this is no exception. I think the last 5 minutes as well, the way that, the score is there, is just stunning, and just, I love the whole soundtrack to this, just absolutely stunning, for a stunning film, and really, I listen to this quite a lot. I listen to a lot of James Newton Howard soundtracks, the scores and everything, and maybe there'll be another one appearing on this list, but yes, this one is absolutely remarkable. The emotion in this, and just the way it has its subtle moments, but again, these big emotional moments that really are quite overwhelming. So yeah, that was at number 10. Number 9 is A Nightmare on Elm Street. Now this is Charles Bernstein, and one I just recently rewatched again. And I've always loved this soundtrack. It's kind of, yes, it's very, very atmospheric again. It's very much has a sense of dread in it, everything, but it's more playful at times. And also it's got its moments, kind of childlike innocence to it. So it kind of has that in there. Of course, the songs as well that they used for that. The Freddy song, and it's just a combination of all these sort of things. The kind of it's kind of got everything that a horror film soundtrack should have. For me, it's just amazing. Again, very, very beautiful stuff at some of the moments, but it just really is such a memorable score, and it fits absolutely perfectly to the film itself. And just the way that it builds the dread in the film, and again, this kind of dreamlike effect that this film has. It kind of the soundtrack definitely, contributes to that, the score, and just a wonderful one. And Nightmare on Elm Street, of course, I love the film as well. So yeah, not much more to say on that one. Next up is Dracula. Now it's the Bram Stoker one in 1992. Wojciech Keeler, I believe, he composed, the score to this. Now, pretty unexpected one probably. This one really though, I absolutely adore this soundtrack. It is just wonderful. Really, it's got this kind of yes. I mean, this film itself, really in general, is very, very known to be very very big, a grand film, which of course a lot of people don't kind of like for this kind of story. I love this film. I think it's close to being a masterpiece, and the score, really adds to the kind of grand operatic feel that this film has. I think as well, the love theme, is absolutely beautiful, really, really uplifting, spiritual, and of course, it is a very, very big, at times, very loud soundtrack, and I love the epic pieces as well. And the prologue, even the kind of battle scenes, that you kind of see in a way, it's all great there, and it just once the love theme kicks in as well, you've just got one of the best, for me personally, horror film soundtracks. So yeah, and number 8. Now number 7 is very very famous, of course, The Exorcist. Now this is of course mainly the theme that is used, and that was by Mike Oldfield, Tubular Bells. This is just amazing. Not much to say about this, but it really is. It's iconic for a reason, and it's just perfectly fits this film. I think the kind of melancholy that it has, the kind of weird kind of mystical feel that this film has, and it's kind of, again, it is a bit kind of childlike, and that's maybe the case, but it really is, as well, very very creepy, at the same time, and just the whole soundtrack to this film, it is wonderful, and the theme, of course, is just a standout for me. It's very 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 iconic, but I love listening to this, and just it always makes me think of the film, which I absolutely adore. So yeah, and number 6 is The Thing in 1982. Now this is of course Ennio Morricone. Now if you've seen my reviews of some Sergio Leone stuff, you probably know that he's either my favourite or my second favourite film composer. Him and John Williams. And yes, basically this, many people would say the best, John Carpenter's score, the score that is in his films, would be Halloween, and I disagree. I think it's a good score. I think Halloween one's fine. Not a great one for me. This one is, and it's easily his best film as well, John Carpenter. But yes, basically Morricone, absolutely masterful score. And yes, if I hadn't seen the film, it probably wouldn't be on the list, or at least as high up as it. But because on its own it is great. I think it's epic. It's kind of progressive, which I love. A lot of the time, and it kind of it's just very very tense and kind of gives me the chills. But of course, when used in the film, that something really is just absolutely stunning. It is very much a one that has to be kind of related to the film more. But yes, basically, the sense of dread and tension that is built, with the soundtrack, and the way it's used in the film, especially, is just perfect. It is probably one of the best used, scores in a film ever. Not let alone horror, and just it's a masterpiece film, and it's certainly a masterful score. One that I listen to quite a lot, and of course I just think about the sequences, that they just use so well to kind of build, as I say, the tension. You could say that this kind of is tension, in a score. It just literally is tension, but I think it's more than that. And it starts to build a lot more, and then it's very very rousing, and kind of quite overwhelming with beauty as well. So yes, that's a number 6. Now we get into the top 5, and of course, a one that maybe people have been waiting for, and that is Jaws, of course, by John Williams. Now John Williams is, as I say, him and Ennio Morricone, very very close in terms of best film composers. I wouldn't even say that this is one of his top 5 scores. It might not even be in his top 10. So that's how good he is. Because I think even Empire of the Sun and stuff, better soundtracks for me. But Jaws, really is a perfect score. It's just amazing. I think it's, again, this is kind of tension. This is what it really represents in a horror film, and just the way, of course, the build, very very famous, kind of build that is used throughout the different shark sequences, but as well, it has got, when they go out to sea, in the film, the trio. It's kind of got these other parts in the score that are just really really kind of uplifting, you could say, and just really really beautiful stuff. And when you actually listen to all of the score, it's just stunning, and of course it's very very epic, kind of, again, quite progressive, you could say. But yeah, overall, Jaws, it's among my favourite films, and certainly actually this is among my favourite soundtracks of all time. Full stop. And definitely number 5 for me. And yes, next up is, of course, now this is the one that really, a lot of people would probably guess would be on my list. It's a film that I absolutely adore, a horror film, a horror comedy, and that is American Werewolf in London. And this is Elmer Bernstein that does the actual score. And of course, mainly though, this is for the songs that are used in the film. You've got Bad Moon Rising, you've got Blue Moon, and you've just got so many great songs used in this film that are just, really just perfect placements of songs here. And of course, the score as well, is really great, and it kind of adds the emotion to the film, the kind of sadness, you could say. Very, very sad at times score, very, very kind of melancholic, and I love that. And of course, combine that with the actual, really uplifting and kind of, rocking songs that you've got in the film. When you watch the film as well, you'll know that this is just an absolutely, the way that the music is used, just couldn't be better really for me. The opening credits even, Blue Moon used there, it's just stunning. I think really adds an atmosphere. Every song placement, and then when you listen to the songs again after the film, it's one of the ones that kind of changes a bit, the perspective, how you feel about the songs. At least it did for me. And it kind of portrays isolation at times. That song at the beginning, and it's just really, really a stunning soundtrack overall, and definitely one of my favourites. Now next up, number 3. Now this would be very, very unexpected. This is a film that is panned, completely panned. It's hated on, and I'm not going to reveal fully my thoughts on the film yet. But for me, it's one of the best soundtracks of all time. By James Newton Howard once again, and that is The Village in 2004. Another Shyamalan film. For me, this is the best score in a Shyamalan film, definitely. Unbreakable, you could say, is fairly close at times, but for me, The Village really is his best, the one that he was working on. And yes, just again, this is not really necessarily a soundtrack that sounds like a horror film. You could even say the film is not really. Is it really a horror film? I class it as a horror film, but really, once you actually see the film, you could kind of call it a different type of film. Certainly, I do. But yes, basically, this soundtrack is more about the actual emotion, the beauty of it all. The instruments used, the backing, just creates just every single track in this film, especially The Vote, which is my favourite, is absolutely wonderful. Really kind of very nostalgic for me. It kind of brings you back to a different time, and as well, just the emotion behind it all. And it does have these kind of sequences, in the film where it's used, and it's kind of the sound of dread and stuff. And you've got some chase sequences where it kind of kicks in as well. It's quite epic, but really it is the pieces in the soundtrack that are the ones that are really just wonderful. Truly human score really. And I think overwhelmed with emotion. And just a beautiful soundtrack that I listen to quite a lot. And I'm not going to say what I think of The Village, but certainly not a bad film for me. Certainly not. That'd be an understatement. I'll be reviewing, of course, the Shyamalan films in December, so look for that. But yes, that was The Village at number 3. And now we come into the top 2. Now, these two are kind of interchangeable, but for me they are, by far the best 2 horror soundtracks of all time. Now, of course, they are both, as well, some of the most popular horror films. For me, they're both in the top 5 horror films, so there's kind of spoilers for them reviews, but, I just say it now, they are in the top 5 horrors, both of them. And yes, these two, as I say, very, very close, and kind of, it just comes down to, I just had to kind of pick. Usually I probably wouldn't be able to decide, but for this list, I had to kind of pick. And at number 2, it's probably one of the most iconic film soundtracks or scores, and that is Psycho. Now, of course, very, very famous. Not much intro needed. I don't want to get into the film too much because I'm going to be reviewing that soon. But basically, Hitchcock really, the way he related the kind of, especially the shower scene, to kind of, play into the actual instruments, and as if, the audience is getting attacked by this. It's just genius, as well. Of course, it's very, very famous, this soundtrack. And it's not just the the moments of tension, everything that he uses with this wonderful soundtrack. It is of course Bernard Herrmann, and it's one of his best scores, and it's just so beautiful. It really is. Once again, just very very beautiful to hear. When you actually listen to it. The scenes in Janet Leigh is just driving. Absolutely wonderful music that kicks in there. It's really perfect for me. One of the best soundtracks, full stop, and just it really is. It has everything that a horror film should have within the score, and it's just truly wonderful. It's kind of it always makes, of course, you hear a couple of the notes, and you think of the film. At least I do, and not just the shower scene. There's many other scenes, but it's just overall such a perfect score that is perfectly used in the film, and on its own, when I listen to it, it's just stunning. It really is. Not for me the best Bernard Herrmann score. You could say. I would definitely say North by Northwest. Certainly Vertigo, which is his best for me that he ever done. You could even argue Taxi Driver. I would probably still say Psycho. But yes, I think one of his very best, and just Bernard Herrmann was one of my top 10 film composers, and this is just another masterful score from him, and it's just amazing. I listen to it quite a lot as well. Number one, is kind of relates to a box set that I have, I kind of have in every video, and you can probably eventually, you'll be able to see what I think, of all these films, and that is by Stanley Kubrick, and that is The Shining. Now, this film is an absolute masterpiece. It really is. It's a contender for the greatest horror film of all time for me, and just the score, of course, the soundtrack. It has, of course, Wendy Carlos, kind of working on the score, and there's just a couple of things in there, that kind of crop up. Not all of her score, made it into the film, which of course, famously very angry about. But yes, basically, combine that, the theme, of course, which just perfectly portrays isolation, sense of wonder, but very, very malicious intent as well. It feels like these spirits, kind of, always on the case kind of thing. It's very, very, complex. It kind of makes me feel a lot of things, and that's just the theme alone, and the way it's used in the opening, which is one of the best openings of all time for me. Just perfect. In terms of atmosphere, this soundtrack is probably in the top 20, full stop, and just of course Kubrick knew how to place different existing songs perfectly. That's mainly what he specialised in, instead of getting people to actually score all of his films. Even Barry Lyndon, it's existing pieces mostly that are just used wonderfully, and at times you kind of just associate all this music with these films. 2001, Space Odyssey, kind of a bit similar here to how he uses it, and it's kind of very, very atmospheric. You could say it portrays isolation perfectly. The sense of dread, it is just stunning. And then you've got kind of the way it kind of builds as the film goes on in intensity, and you could say at times distance as well. It kind of as, of course, Jack Torrance grows more and more separated from the family, and just topping that off with the actual songs that are injected to kind of bring us back to another time period, which of course relates to the actual story of the film. It's just absolutely flawless, and then top it all off with the ending song, Midnight, the stars are you, just amazing. Just how that is used as well, could not be better. There would never be a greater filmmaker who kind of knew how to use music. For me personally, there's been people who kind of for example Spielberg, of course worked with Williams, and yes, overall their soundtracks, the collaboration between them are the best, but for me no one knew how to use music for me quite as much as Kubrick, and this, while not his best soundtrack to one of his films, it is for me the best horror soundtrack, and I listen to it all the time, absolutely love it. It's wonderful. It has so much meaning, and just it has everything in it. The classical pieces. I'm a massive classical music fan, and it has just some great songs in there as well. And of course, Wendy Carlos wonderfully scored the pieces as well throughout the film. So yes, there we have it. My top 10 horror film soundtracks. And yes, of course, leave yours in the comments. It's Halloween, so yeah, it was good to do. Very very hard to do because some of these are, especially with music. For me, it's it's hard to decide exactly on a list. But yes, I had fun doing it, and of course, I think I came to a pretty accurate list of what I feel at the moment with these soundtracks. And yes, thanks for watching. Of course, leave any thoughts in the comments, and yes, thanks for watching.